Every leader knows that a thriving organization depends on the energy, productivity, and commitment of its people. But few leaders are able to cultivate the employee engagement and performance needed for this level of success. What's the difference? Positive leadership practices. Welcome to the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast with your host, positive work culture expert, Alex Bratty. Ready to harness the power of positive leadership? Let's dive right in.
Hello and welcome to episode 36 of the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bratty, and this week I am so honored and grateful to have Dr. David Arrington on the show. He is an executive coach and the COO of Arrington Coaching, and he's going to share with us his wisdom, experience, and expertise in how leaders can bring more diversity and inclusion into their own work and their organizations. This is an incredibly timely topic, and that is why I'm so thrilled to have him on the podcast. So let me share a little of David's very impressive credentials, and then we'll jump right into this important discussion. So David's stated mission is to impact an entire generation of leaders. And he does this by helping executives realize their vision and create sustainable change through executive coaching and training. David holds a doctorate in strategic leadership, which he puts to good use in his coaching practice. He is a force multiplier for executives who want to stretch their goals fast. He partners with C-level executives and their leadership teams, increasing accountability, clarity, and focus. David pastored for 12 years, and that experience allows him to help leaders find constructive ways to lead their teams. He's the principal of Arrington Coaching and is a much sought after coach, speaker, and leadership trainer. He and his team launched arringtontraining.com to make his practical teaching style and proven methodology available to more leaders and teams. In his spare time, David enjoys watching movies, TV shows, and listening to great music. When he's not watching a great or terrible movie with his beautiful wife of 23 years and 3 kidults, I love that, kidults, you might catch him nodding his head to some old school rap or playing the action-adventure game No Man's Sky. Welcome, David. It's so wonderful to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Alex. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to start by having you share, your definition of leadership, how you define positive leadership. And I think that'll set us up nicely to jump into this whole conversation that's happening right now about diversity and inclusion. So how would you define positive leadership?
And that's such a good question because, and I'll give you a roundabout answer, then I'll give you the absolute direct answer.
Sure.
There are thousands, literally thousands of definitions of leadership. So I will be tossing another definition onto the pile, but mine would be, it is a trust-based relationship where you are motivating and inspiring your people to accomplish shared goals. So for me, there are a lot of important words in there, but I'd go with fundamentally the number one most important word would be relationship, because in my experience, most leaders forget that leadership is fundamentally a relationship. And if there is no relationship or the relationship is sour, it really, really impacts your ability to lead. You can't motivate people who don't like you, and you won't get them to rally around shared goals if they don't trust you. So yeah, that would be my quick and dirty when you ask on what my definition of leadership is.
And I love that. It's so relevant to the whole positive leadership movement too, because we talk about that a lot on the show, relationships in general. And I 100% agree with you that leadership really is about relationships, but not just relationships, but building positive, high quality relationships, right? I mean,
absolutely,
we can have a relationship, but it's not that great. So
enemies
really
have a relationship.
Yeah.
Enemies have a relationship. Yeah. You have to quantify the relationship.
Yeah, I love it. And the trust is crucial. I mean, without trust, there is no relationship to start with, right?
No.
At least certainly not a positive one that can be had. So
No.
I love it. I love it. So tell us, let's dive into this whole conversation around diversity and inclusion, because I mean, this topic has been important for years and years and years. Okay. It is not a new topic.
No.
And of course, it now has come really to the fore and to the, central focus of so many organizations with everything that's going on here in the United States at the moment, with the protests, with the killing of George Floyd by police in broad daylight, and all the other, many, many, many incidents that happened before that. But it's sort of like it all reached a boiling point this year. So tell us a little bit about this, because I know that, when I used to be in corporate life, and I'm talking about 20 years ago, we had diversity and inclusion training. Okay.
Of course.
And I can
Good.
tell you back then, literally everybody rolled their eyes at it. Like they were like, oh, we gotta attend this diversity inclusion thing. And it wasn't just white people doing it. It was everybody doing it, right? White, black, yellow, purple, blue, it didn't matter what color your skin was. It was kind of like this token thing that we all had to participate in to check off the box that the organization was doing diversity and inclusion. So I really want to dig into with you, like, how can now at this great opportunity, it become actually a really important and valued aspect of organizations and leadership, so that it's not that eye roll, oh, HR is making us do it. So tell us, I know you've got like 3 practical steps that leaders can take to bring diversity and inclusion into their daily work. Tell us about that.
So yeah, you give a great backdrop. It's not just George Floyd. George Floyd was just the most recent and most egregious demonstration of police brutality against Black and brown people. And that is why it touched such a nerve, because for the entire Black and brown community, this is life for us. We know these things happen. And what I'm excited about is that for the first time in my life, I'm seeing people outside of that Black and brown community realize that, wait, this can't continue. So when I look at it from a leadership perspective, I say, this is not an eye roll add-on, token gesture that is made that you have to sit through. In this moment, as leaders, we need to understand that leadership is part of that diversity, equity, and inclusion are part of our leadership skill set. It's no longer something that's done by diversity and inclusion, the organization or department within your organization. It's something that each and every leader needs to pick up the mantle on themselves and work to make it happen day by day. Institutional bias is not going away because there's a department, right? Just like racism didn't go away with the end of slavery or the signing of the Voting Rights Act. None of that changed the bigger problems. It's not until individuals own the outcomes and say, you know what, I can make a change, I can make a difference, I can take a stand here, that things will change. And so that's what I talk about when I talk about diversity and inclusion as it relates to leaders and practical steps they can take every day. So the first, let me give you 3. Let me just give them to you and we can unpack them if you want, Alex.
Sure.
One is going to be provide equity via resources. Another one is going to be asking for more diversity. Yeah, asking for it. And the third one is going to be beginning healthy discussions. And I left the last one. The third one is probably the scariest one for most people, but those are 3 ways that every leader can step up to the plate day by day and make a difference, just by asking different questions, but just by listening more, just by understanding that there are perspectives that you may not share simply because you've never been made aware of them. So talking to, again, Black and brown colleagues, they're going to have a worldview that's going to be fundamentally different than perhaps their white counterpart because of the things they've gone through, their experiences, and the lives they have to live in order to try to get the same type of equity and the same type of opportunity in society.
Yeah, and I love how you kicked that off, because wow, is it so true that if we want to change anything in an organization, the leader has to embody it and own it. You're so right. Just because there's a department allocated to it doesn't mean anything is going to happen, right? And that's kind of how it was 20 years ago when I was, going through that training. It's like the HR department had that in their purview, and they came along and said, okay, everybody has to attend this, right? But there wasn't a whole lot of leadership ownership of it. So I love that because that's true of sort of any change we want to make in the organization, right? So why should diversity and inclusion be any different? I love that. So yeah, let's talk about these 3 practical steps. I really love them. So you said a leader needs to ask for more diversity on their team. Now that sounds maybe a little scary to me. So tell me about what that is and how our leaders, our listeners, can embrace that idea.
So one, if you're hiring, let's just say you're looking for new people on your team, ask the question, how are we selecting candidates? Are we, this is your responsibility. Most people will just kick it over to HR and let it be, but I would encourage leaders to take it a step further. Ask how we're looking for candidates. Ask if we're looking for diverse candidates. Even encourage, I would like to interview diverse candidates. If you're bringing me a roster of, say, 10 people, I want this percentage to be diverse because this is what our team looks like now, right? We don't have much diversity. So what we need to do is bring in these new ideas, these new perspectives, these new just ways of interacting, because that's going to make us more productive, more profitable, and it's going to help us solve problems in whole new ways. And I would encourage you, as you look at this, as I would encourage every leader to look at this from their own perspective as well, because you want to just say, what biases do I have, right? What biases am I not aware of? So do I think, like you said, and I love how you kicked it off, right? It was an eye roll. Everybody just, face palmed when they said, oh my goodness, another diversity and inclusion training. What I would ask is, what do you think about diversity and inclusion, diversity, equity, and inclusion? Do you feel that we're lowering the standard? Because that's a common misunderstanding about diversity, equity, and inclusion. The idea that, because we're bringing in more minority candidates or Black and brown candidates, that we are lowering the standards. It's fundamentally untrue. What a Harvard study found in 2003 was that employers were more open to white candidates with criminal records than they were to Black candidates with no criminal records. So
I had not seen that study. Thank you for sharing it. I'm not surprised, but it's just such a,
But these are the biases we have. So we think that fundamentally, if we're opening the door that, and I have some trigger words, that tolerance for me is a negative word, because being tolerated is not something anyone wants to be. So just going back and unpacking your own biases around diversity and inclusion is going to help you to ask better questions and to really take a look in the mirror. And it's not saying you're bad or that you're racist. It's saying, guess what? We all have unconscious bias. And when we ask questions, we're able to unearth some of that bias and think, well, maybe I do think it's lowering the bar. Maybe I am a little bit hesitant because I'm not sure what I'll get if we bring in more quote unquote diversity hires, which is also a pejorative if you really, think about it. But what you want to do is you want to look up and ask the questions, because you want to move to intentional inclusivity from unintentional exclusivity. You don't want to be unintentionally exclusive. You want to be intentionally inclusive.
I love that. And I mean, you have your doctorate. I know you're probably evidence-based in your in all the work that you do, and you just cited a study.
We try.
And I know, there's at this point, sort of the moral piece of it apart, right? Like, the argument for diversity is almost like, why are we even still debating it? There's actually so many studies out there that show if you have diversity in your organization, you're going to be more creative. You're going to be more innovative. And guess what? You're going to be more profitable. So it's like, this is a bottom line, argument as well. So if you can't get through to someone on sort of the more like, this is the right thing to do, the virtuous kind of approach, then there's a bottom line argument to be made for this stuff too, you know?
And that's what gets lost. Again, because of bias,
Right.
because of the way we're thinking about this. And it's tragic, but yeah, we're still here. And I think, just going back to the bigger societal picture that you were painting earlier, I think it's because we as a society have chosen not to discuss race, have chosen to put it in we don't talk about race and politics. And that became it's race, politics, and religion, right? Those are the three we don't talk about, right? Yeah. So we put it in these categories, so we don't really know how to talk about it. We walk into a situation with zero language skills when it comes to having dialogue about race, which only means we've pushed it further to the background. We've allowed the situation to fester instead of actually discussing it and moving forward. So we should have been here 25 years ago, but we're still here in the same space because we've chosen a number of avenues as a society that don't allow us to have the type of productive discussion that we need to have to bring everyone to the table.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I want to unpack a couple more of your 3 steps that you mentioned, sure. But just because you brought this up, I just want to sort of go off a little bit here on a tangent, but like having that conversation, you're right. There hasn't been a conversation, and that's why there really hasn't been progress, right? I think some people are afraid to have the conversation. So, I mean, for anybody watching this podcast, you can clearly see David is black and I am white. Okay.
You're just listening. Imagine. I gotta fix my chair. My chair is abandoning me as we're having the conversation. But go ahead.
Sorry, we don't want to lose you. Just disappear.
Yeah, I know. I was just shrinking lower, and I was like, "Come on." But go ahead.
Okay, good. So, if you're listening, just so you know, I'm white. David is black, and so, you know, I mean, I'll be completely honest, right? Like, I have white friends who, number one, they're scared. They're scared about everything right now. They don't really know what to say. They don't know how to ask. They don't even know the questions to be asking in case they somehow, like, as you said earlier, don't even realize they have some kind of implicit bias, and it's like foot and mouth disease without, like, they didn't mean to, they were well intended, but they don't know what to say. And so it's very difficult to maybe have that conversation. And by the same token, I'm sure there is some fear, you know, in the Black and brown community too, about how do we have this conversation? So, like, what do you say to leaders who might be feeling that, no matter the color of their skin? Like, if they're having sort of fear or anxiety around opening up this discourse, what's your advice there?
I would encourage any leader, because leaders should be educating themselves continually. They should be reading, they should be listening to books, they should be digesting consuming as much content as they possibly can. But I would encourage leaders to educate themselves as much as they can, and take this on as a new topic of study. So I would encourage a few books. I would encourage Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I would encourage The New Jim Crow, which is incredibly enlightening. I would also encourage The Rich and the Rest of Us. And these are just 3 books, and there are a number of books. If you just look up books to help you discuss race, that's going to show up. There's no reason in today's society that we shouldn't have that type of discussion for fear of not saying the right thing. Right. I wouldn't say it's an easy out. I think most people just haven't thought, let me take this topic on and study it, versus I just want to go and have a conversation. And that's why most of those conversations aren't productive, is because you don't have an outcome. You don't know where you're going. You don't know what you want to do. You feel like, hey, it's bad out there. What can I do to help? And that's a tough question to ask any Black or brown person, because it's almost like asking me, what does air taste like? It's just, how can you help? Well, there are a number of ways, but honestly, from my perspective, I see things and you would see different things from your perspective. So going back to how to have that conversation, I would say humbly. I would say before you go in and do foot and mouth disease, I would say, you know what? I really didn't know about this. I'm going to go educate myself. I want to read a few things. If you want to read to understand why the monuments are being taken down around the country to the Confederate soldiers, well, most people understand that. But there's a lot of confusion on that among people who feel that that's their heritage and shouldn't be taken down. Go read the Cornerstone speech by the then Vice President of the Confederacy, and you'll understand that the entire platform of the Confederacy, and therefore every symbol associated with it, was rooted in the idea that Black people were subjugated to white people. And if we still honor that today, we're saying the exact same thing. So you got to understand, Black and brown colleagues, friends, we're struggling right now. And I don't like to speak on behalf of all Black people because I don't have the right. But I can say that, there's a lot going on. And while we're not, you said, we may be nervous about having the conversation. We're not nervous often. Again, I'm speaking for all of the Black and brown people in the world, but we're often not as reticent to have those conversations because we're used to having those conversations. We talk about this a lot, right? It's because it's part of life. Think about this. When I taught my sons, and I'll teach my daughter to drive, or I should say my wife usually does because I'm not as patient, but we talk to them, we teach them how to be pulled over. Because if you drive, it's just a statistical realization. You're going to get pulled over at some point.
Right.
You want to live through that. And that's a conversation most white parents will never have to have. Right. So that we talk about race, we have to, because as much as we don't necessarily, again, let me put it to me, as much as I don't necessarily judge people by their complexion, I know that I am seen a certain way. And that's why I did my doctorate, really. I mean, because I knew as a Black man in America and coming to talk to leaders about leadership, I had to have my stuff together. I have to be, there's one of my favorite quotes, and it may be apocryphal, and that's okay, but it's a Samuel L. Jackson quote that they said, hey, in order to get to do well in this business, you're going to have to be 10 times better than anybody else. And his response was, okay, let's do it. Right. That's the way we understand. That's the way in circles I'm in. I know my Black and brown friends, they know we have to be better just to have the same opportunities, just to get to the table. So those conversations, we have them. I would just encourage you to not ask your Black and brown friends or colleagues to speak on behalf of all of, everyone else. Like I'm doing so eloquently today, right? Right. But I would encourage you to ask them about their experience.
Right.
I would encourage you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I cut you off. Finish your thought.
No, I was just going to say, I would encourage you to listen humbly, to ask more questions, to be curious, and to educate yourself, because it's tough now that it's become just a national conversation, which it's long overdue. It's difficult for us. We're already, like I said, we're struggling. It's a lot of emotional baggage. A lot of things come to the surface, and to ask then, for us to kind of deep dive like 15 times with 15 different people, it can be emotionally draining. So that's why I say, take a minute, read some books, read some articles, James Baldwin, just go back and Langston Hughes, read some of the works that speak to the African American experience, and that will better help you kind of sort of get a grip on where we are.
Yeah. I mean, you make a really great point there, right? Because it's almost a little intellectually lazy to just be like, okay, I'm just going to call up my Black and brown friends and ask them, and that's going to, make me feel better and somehow like I'm doing something about it. But yeah, I love that you're challenging leaders to essentially be curious, like be intellectually curious about this topic. Like, treat it like you would with other topics that you want to learn about. And as you point out, I mean, there's no end to literature on this, right? And as you said, if you just Google, how do I have a conversation about race? Yeah, I'm sure multiple books will come up, right? So I love that. It's like, again, sort of bringing that broader lens to this whole discussion, right? Like we talked about earlier, hey, you know, you have to, as a leader, embody this. It can't just be in another department. Guess what? That applies to all issues in organizations, right? And this almost, the advice here too is like, hey, don't be afraid of this topic. We need to have the discussion. Basically take it like you would with another topic and go find out about it. Get educated about it. Don't just call up your friend. I mean, as a leader, you don't necessarily just call up your friend to learn about, how we can be more innovative. You go educate yourself about it,
Yeah,
right?
you'll go buy some books. You'll go, you'll go to a conference. You'll do something. You'll try to get that edge. That's right.
Exactly. So yeah, I really love that. Okay, so I want to go back to your 3 steps because they were really, really important. And you'd said about asking for more diversity. We talked about that. You also talked about, I think you said providing equity via resources. So what does that mean and how can leaders do that?
So fundamentally, what you want to do is you want to understand that everyone doesn't have your experiences. Everyone may not have your opportunities. So think about training in an organizational context. It's fundamentally cattle chutes. Training is offered, everybody goes through it, right? And it's, you get out of it what you get out of it. And like you said, half the time you're rolling your eyes. And that's why as a trainer, my job is to make sure no one ever falls asleep in my class. My job is to make sure that people are laughing the whole time because I know I'm taking up your time. And I know for most people, training has that negative connotation. But just thinking, okay, I'm sending someone to diversity training. Okay, good. But what if they need something else that's off the menu? So what if your Black and brown colleagues need additional mentoring and additional coaching? So I was fortunate enough to I was a participant in the Inroads program, which I still remember. This was back in the 90s. Wow. I was in high school and it was a nonprofit organization designed to help talented minority youth place them in business situations. Of course, I always say it flawlessly, but there I flubbed it like 3 times. It's okay though, we're gonna move on. But I had that opportunity. So I was in offices early on. I was in offices almost all through high school, through college. So graduating, getting a job, working in an office environment was second nature to me. I understood it. Everyone doesn't have that experience. And that's not just a Black and brown concern, but if you're hiring great people that may not have all of those experiences, it's good to have opportunities for mentorship, for coaching, for additional training, and provide equity, because fundamentally equity is the idea that everyone does have different backgrounds. Everyone is starting at a different spot, some because of institutional bias, some because of other reasons, but equity is to make sure that everyone gets a level playing field versus equality, which is give the same thing to everyone, which only helps those who are further ahead stay further ahead, and those who are further behind perhaps even lag further behind. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you understand the needs of your team and the team members. And in so doing, you can offer different resources and make those resources available. And I think that's something that's missing, because still it's a cattle chute. Everyone goes through the same thing. And it's only when you're at higher levels in an organization, you get a coach. And mentoring is excellent, but mentoring can be hit and miss. I'll tell you, when I was at Exxon way, way, way back in the day, I was a mere babe. I was like just in diapers at Exxon, right? And I was going to work with this gentleman who looked like me, charismatic guy. I remember handsome. I was like, this dude, I want this dude to show me the ropes. He was already like 2 or 3 skip levels above me. So, and he was good. We had already met a few times, and then he moved organizations and I lost track of him. And I mean, I think that's a huge missed opportunity, because there was nobody else to back me up. And honestly, there was only one other person there that looked like me, and she and I were friends, but it was never going to be a mentorship, because she would just, it wasn't going to be a formalized mentorship, I should say. She was awesome, but she just wasn't open to that, or I never asked, or whatever. That is key and critical. Think about how many CEOs, Black CEOs, there are on the Fortune 100, right? How many of how many people can your Black and brown colleagues look up to and see as a mentor for them?
Right.
Not just any mentor, but someone that looks like them, someone whose experience may be similar to theirs, someone who may understand the world they come from or live in a way that someone else might not. Those are the
Yeah.
types of resources. That's the type of equity I'm referring to. And yeah, it's many layered, but you want to make sure that not just bringing diverse people in, but ensuring that diverse people succeed in this organization.
Yeah. I mean, leaders really, whether you're managing a team or you're leading the organization, I mean, there's now an inherent need for leaders, managers to basically be coaches, to
Yeah.
individualize what people need rather than, as you described it perfectly, the cattle chute, right? It's like, okay, we're all going to do this.
Mhm.
And half the people might be interested and the other half are doing the eye roll, right? Instead, I mean, it's about having your manager sit with their, their team, like schedule those one-on-ones and have this discussion. Okay,
Yep.
where do you want to progress? Where do you think you need support? How can we do that for you, right? And really helping people move forward. And again, that is just it's so completely baked into the notion of positive leadership, is that idea of wanting to develop people and
Absolutely.
seeing them for who they are and recognizing their strengths and their, what makes them great, what makes them unique, and then nurturing that in collaboration, like working with them to say, how can I support you? Where do you think you need help? Let's get you where you need to go. And again, it just, it ties in beautifully with what you're saying about, providing this equity via resources. I love that. I love it. All right. And then your third one was about discussions. You mentioned beginning healthy discussions on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. And I think we maybe kind of already touched on that
I was
because
going to
we
say,
did talk about
yeah.
difficult conversations, but I don't know if you wanted to add more to that, or did we kind of cover that one already?
No, I think we covered it. It's just in a different order, which again, flexibility, we're good. I
Yeah.
think we said what could be said. And I would just encourage leaders to be, again, humble as they ask questions and flexible and creative in how they bring diversity into their team.
Mhm.
So when I'm working with, let's say, a virtual team, which a lot of teams are right now, then I would encourage, especially if it's a global virtual team, I would encourage something along the lines of, hey, let everyone bring a dish, even though we're not eating it together, we can talk about it. And we can talk about why this dish is important, where this comes from, why, what it means to you in your culture. I would say, ask similar questions. So talk to me about where you are. Tell me about something where you grew up. That may be a good question. And again, it also goes back to the relationship. That has to be, I would encourage that to be part of a private discussion versus the first open discussion you have, because people may not be willing to share that transparently. Again, and if you don't have your outcome set up for those big discussions, you want to make sure that you tread very softly and listen very, very diligently. But in one-on-one conversations, you can, share a little bit about you, and then, ask to share a little bit about them. And you can do the same thing once you've developed that level of trust in your team, with them in team meetings as well.
Yeah, I love it. So one last question, because it's sort of been in the back of my mind as we've been having this conversation. Despite everything that we're seeing on social media, in the news, despite all the organizations that are making efforts right now, there's still people that will turn around and say, I'm not racist. I don't have to change anything about what I'm doing. And there might even be some organizations where the leadership team kind of feels like, we don't need to do anything different. We're not racist, so we're fine. What do you
Sure.
say to people like that?
I would say that every organization and every human being has work to do. So the notion that you are above having implicit bias or unconscious bias, or the notion that you are somehow inoculated against the institutional bias that fundamentally undergirds our entire society would be a stretch to believe. So that would encourage me to think maybe there's a decision here that's different. Maybe there's an actual decision you're making to not be inclusive and not be diverse. That would be where my mind would go. And then I would start asking questions to help them realize that, yeah, everybody's got some moves they need to make. And every person is not racist. Every person who has these misunderstandings isn't racist. A lot of times it's just a lack of information. But now here's the trick. Here's where it comes in. And this is the tough love part. When you are made aware that this type of institutional bias exists, and it's presented to you in living color. That's a 90s reference. There you go. You're welcome for that one. In living color. So if you're aware, J-Lo started on that, to be honest, if you want to be just a little more pop culture reference. But if you want to step back and say it's not real after you've heard all of that and seen all of that, then I would think that the biases go a little deeper. I would think that maybe you got to do a little bit more soul searching. And sometimes you have to be careful of perceptions. So I worked with a client recently who had put their foot in their mouth in a big meeting, basically said that I don't believe we're racist. She said this in a very charged meeting I was moderating, and I tried to help her avoid this because I knew where it was going and I knew the perception they were creating. And I don't believe them to be racist. I believe them to be honest, but unaware. So from their perspective, they were answering one thing and saying one thing, but from the perspective of everyone else, they were hearing something completely different. And so I work with them to help them start rebuilding some relationships and reconciling some relationships, because that will stick. And what you want to do is understand you've got implicit bias. Your organization has implicit bias. You know why? Because your organization is made up of people. People made the processes. People made the culture. And all of these people had biases. Going back again to that Harvard study in 2003, if you're choosing a white potential employee or a white candidate with a criminal record over a black candidate without a criminal record, all things being equal, that's an implicit bias, right?
So that's a problem right there.
That's a huge problem right there. And I think it's far more deep-seated than we know. And that's why as leaders, we've got to step back. And when we hear those things, we've got to challenge them. We can't just idly sit by and say, oh yeah, we obviously don't have a problem because the people upstairs in the boardroom say we don't have a problem. The onus is on every leader to speak up. And if you can't affect organizational change, you can affect team change. If you can't affect team change, you can affect your sphere of influence change. You can start having conversations. You can start speaking up. You can start reading. You can start asking questions and being curious. You can do all of that today without anyone signing a check or anyone authorizing it above you on an org chart. All of those things you can do today. And that's why it's going to take each and every one of us making a decision to eventually, I'd love to say it. I'm a really optimistic guy. I don't even know if I can say eradicate, but so lessen the impact of institutional bias that it no longer adversely affects any one population, specifically Black and Brown.
Yeah. Amen to that. I mean, that would be an amazing world, right? And I mean, I think like ultimately it's about, we all need to have greater self-awareness.
Absolutely.
Like that's, when we say, well, I'm not racist or I'm not prejudiced or I'm not biased, it's like, wait a minute, you are on something. I mean, as you said, we're all human. I don't know whether it was the Holocaust Museum in New York or DC, I forget now, but I believe they had two doors. And above one door, it said, all who are not prejudiced go through this door. All who are prejudiced go through this door. And of course, everybody wanted to go through the, well, I'm not prejudiced door. Well, guess what was behind the door? A brick wall. Nobody gets to enter that way. Because
I was going to say
We're
I was
all
gonna say it was
carrying
locked.
prejudice, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
locked brick wall. I mean, either way, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very powerful way to make the message. Obviously different situation than what we are talking about today, but really kind of relevant and still wrapped up in the whole, everybody has prejudice, everybody has some kind of bias going on. And so to sort of blanket claim, like, I don't have any, I'm pretty perfect, I got it all. It's like, maybe a little more self-awareness that would help
Yeah.
you, maybe.
That seems like a 358-degree blind spot at that point.
Exactly.
That's a pretty big blind spot. That's a pretty big blind spot.
Exactly. Oh, I love you are providing so much wonderful wisdom and just, your years of experience and your years of expertise around this. It's been fabulous. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know our listeners are going to get so much value out of this. So what if they want to get in touch with you, David? Can you tell us how people can connect with you further? And also, I think you have a book you want to share, and you also have a special complimentary offer as well.
I do. So I'll start with the book. So Promotable came out right before COVID came out. So we were pre-COVID, amazingly, like a week or two. And then like,
Then the world changed.
yeah, right after the Super Bowl. It was a week after Super Bowl. And then 2 weeks later, everything was upended. So yeah, Promotable is out. It's doing really well. People are really enjoying it. And it's, I have it right here. Haha.
Yeah, I was going to say, put it up for anybody who's
I was
watching.
gonna say,
put
yeah.
it up.
Yeah. It's demonstrate your value, highlight your potential, land your next promotion. And I work with clients, and fundamentally the book is designed to be like sitting with me over coffee, talking about your career. That's what I did. So like the pop culture references, they'll show up. I've had people tell me they were reading it and they just bust out laughing like by themselves. They just found it amusing. So that is there. And we have a course that augments the book. So I go into much more depth in the course. And that's one of the offers I was making to your team. Oh yeah, you can get this on Amazon, by the way, to your community. And generally that course is $395 or $397. And for your listeners, we're making it available for a short time for $27.
Whoa, that's amazing. That's like less than 10% of the overall price. Wow, what an offer. That is amazing. So where can everybody needs to run, not walk, to get this offer. So where can they go to get it, David?
They can go to arringtontraining.com, and I believe the code is PLM for Positive Leadership Movement. So it's your code for you. You see it, and they use your code, and they get that amazing discount. And the reason we're doing that seriously is because so many things have changed, and because so many people are struggling out of work, looking for the next move. That's why it's like, yeah, we're making all this great content available for, literally next to nothing. I mean, there's not much lower I could go before I'm just giving it away for free. But the funny thing is, you and I both know people don't respect things they get for free. So
that's right.
Yeah. So that's the other, and speaking of things you don't respect for, getting them free, if you're also on Arrington Training, there are right now, I think 2 free courses that you can sign up for. One is on giving powerful feedback. The other is leading meetings that don't suck.
Oh, cool. Leading meetings that don't suck. Everyone needs to take that course immediately.
Yeah. Leading meetings that don't suck. Yeah.
I love it. And so for the special course, though, it's arringtontraining.com/PLM for Positive Leadership Movement.
So it's arringtontraining.com, and you'll see Becoming Promotable. I'll drop a link. I'll give you a link so you can share it with your folks.
Perfect.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes, absolutely. That'll be awesome.
If they go there, they'll see Becoming Promotable, and if they click on it, they'll see the regular price. Then they can add the coupon, which is PLM, and then the price will drop precipitously.
Awesome. All right. That is incredibly generous. You've been generous with your time today. You have been generous with your wisdom, and now you're being incredibly generous with your intellectual property. I mean, this is stuff that genuinely will help people move forward in their careers and in their leadership positions, especially at a time when it can be really tough out there. So I am incredibly grateful to have you on the show today. Thank you for being here.
It is my pleasure, Alex. And I really appreciate you having me on. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Awesome. All right. Well, folks, you heard it all today. We had a terrific conversation about diversity and inclusion. This one might be an episode that you need to re-listen to, because there is like layers to the onion in there. There's so much wisdom that David shared with us. So, and if you have positive leadership stories to share about diversity and inclusion in your organization, or if you've questions on this topic, because Lord knows there are a lot of questions around it, and I know we just kind of touched the surface of it today. So if you've got questions, write to me at questions@positiveleadershipmovement.com. I always love to hear you. All right, that's it from us this week. Thank you for being part of the Positive Leadership Movement and inspiring me to do what I do every single day.
Make sure you subscribe to the show. If you like this episode, please rate and review. If you want to get more from Alex, check out Happiness at Work, where she provides leaders with a proven path to cultivate a positive work culture that increases performance, productivity, and profitability. Go to happinessatworknow.com. Join us next week and harness the power of positive leadership for your organization.